So I want to start with a conversation about when we talk about statistics, what are we talking about? What is a statistics, as this cat so curiously would like to know? Well, there's a lot of answers to this question. I wanted to pull a quote that I recently found that I thought was a solid definition in terms of the approach that our class is going to be taking with statistics, which is that statistics is the art and science of collecting, organizing, interpreting, and presenting quantitative and qualitative data for the purpose of drawing scientifically founded conclusions among interdisciplinary applications. So it's a wordy definition, but it's a good one. And there's a few reasons that I like it. So first of all, when you see the terms quantitative and qualitative data, they're talking about different forms that data can come in. So quantitative data would be very similar to like when you have to fill in a survey and you check certain boxes, or you indicate like, here's my answer, multiple choice kind of style data. That's quantitative data. Qualitative data is more open-ended. If you were asked a survey question that says like, talk about something you enjoyed about this class, or talk about something you think could be done better, your answers to those would be qualitative because you're describing with words, you're writing in paragraph formation, you're not being asked to fit your answers in tiny little boxes so that they can be used for data analysis and interpretation later. So I wanted to provide some clarity just on those two terms real quick. But essentially what we're saying here is that statistics is an art and a science. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about statistics, because so very often we're led to believe that science, that math, that statistics are these really non-subjective, very realistic, very sound sort of reasoning judgment style processes, when in reality, there is art involved in science, involved in statistics, just like there is anywhere else. And a lot of what we're doing is actually very subjective. The way that I would highlight information and share information and the conclusions that I would draw from a particular set of information would be very different than how anybody else would step in and do it, even if we were aligned, like even if we both had a general agreement about what the best steps were to do with statistics, we would both still have very different interpretations of the meaning, of how to share that meaning, of what to do with that meaning. And that's where the art piece of statistics comes into play. So really what statistics is doing for us is it's offering us a framework. It's offering us, here are these steps, here are these processes, here is what, at this point at least in our evolutionary development as humans, here are our agreements as to how decisions from a scientific standpoint are made. So it offers a framework for us to make decisions with on a much grander scale in terms of how experiments are organized, how they're executed, how they're analyzed. It offers a structure for us. It is on us as individual humans working within that structure to fill in the gaps and make sure that the way that we're using statistics is actually as effective as statistics is ultimately designed to be. So in this class, we're going to spend a lot of time doing what I like to call looking behind the veil of understanding what's really happening when we see things being shared from a scientific, from a statistical standpoint. They're very often interconnected. Science and statistics are very often interconnected. So what we're going to be doing in this class is learning about this framework and then learning how to navigate within it. How do we ask questions? How do we think about filling in some of those pieces? Humans are what makes statistics either great or awful. As the first video from John Oliver talked about, there are a lot of ways that statistics are shared in society today that are really, really, really not helpful and honestly can be pretty damaging. So John Oliver did a great job, better than I could ever hope to do, with offering a broad overview of how things can go wrong sometimes. I wanted to offer just a couple examples that I've seen come up as relevant. So for example, in terms of how is statistics relevant in our everyday lives, if you use a toothbrush, if you brush your teeth to maintain your dental health, that was ultimately developed through statistics. So here's a couple articles that talk about scientific studies that were used to look at like how much force should we use when we're brushing our teeth? And is it more effective to use a regular toothbrush or an electronic toothbrush in terms of maintaining our dental health? The second study is about a pediatric population. So how does this look within children even? So here's where statistics and research are coming into play to influence the very day-to-day life experiences that we have, the ways that we try to maintain our dental health. One very small example of many. And then here is how this information can suddenly be turned and twisted into something a little bit less helpful. So this is about flossing, but there was a flossing scandal that evolved in dental health a couple of years ago. I wanted to pull a couple article headlines about that topic, and then just ask a couple questions, pose a couple questions for us to think about. So here's a Mother Jones article that says, "Guilty no more, flossing doesn't work." So essentially these articles are all focused on this AP investigation, this scientific investigation that found that there's weak evidence in terms of whether flossing is actually helpful in our dental health. So Mother Jones says, don't need to. Los Angeles Times in 2016, haven't been flossing lately? Don't feel too bad. Evidence for the benefits of flossing is weak, very unreliable. Daily News said flossing has no proven benefits, so U.S. Health Department stops recommending the practice. Very solid, secure, confident title there. Forbes says dentists say you need to floss. Science says you don't. We'll come back to that. All right, so here's the actual article. The AP, so the AP is a professional organization that a lot of folks turn to, so it is a reliable source for sure. Here's the actual article that these folks were all referencing. Here is what the AP actually did. So the AP looked at the most rigorous research conducted over the past decade, focusing on 25 studies that generally compared the use of a toothbrush with the condition of toothbrushes and floss. So somebody just brushed versus if somebody brushed and floss. What were the benefits of the folks who also flossed? The findings: the evidence for flossing is weak, very unreliable, of very low quality, carries a moderate to large potential for bias. Okay, so that's important for us to know. However, the other important thing for us to know in terms of statistics is just because something hasn't yet been studied or proven does not mean that it's false, right? So the statement that dentists say you need to floss, science says you don't, actually what the science says is the science says we need more research about whether flossing is beneficial or not. So here is a article from Harvard Health Publications. Tossing flossing is the headline of this article. And then here's the major point here. So this person is also making the same points I am, which is that look at all these headlines, look at how flashy they are. Tossing flossing is even pretty flashy too. Don't need to feel bad about flossing, guilty no more. Again, if we read down a little bit here, we're missing the point. There's a saying in the science world that absence of proof isn't proof of absence. So just because we don't yet have the proof that something is effective doesn't mean we can say that that thing is not effective. There's a difference between finding research that says that flossing is ineffective and looking at research articles and critiquing the processes that those researchers' articles use in order to prove the benefits of flossing. So there's a difference between flossing doesn't work at all and the evidence of whether flossing works or not is flawed. So that's the kind of debates that we get into with statistics. Again, this is very similar to the points that John Oliver made in terms of we need to be very careful about how the general public is being informed of how statistics are being used. We need a much better understanding of what statistics are actually saying so that we can actually understand, do we need to toss flossing or do we need to keep flossing? All right, other ways statistics show up in our everyday lives, how search engines work. So I'm not a techie person, and some of this is a little bit beyond me. Like, I don't understand why spiders is the analogy that's used in terms of search engines and web processes, but apparently that's what's used. So statistics also comes into play in our everyday lives. If you're typing buttons into the search engine is using your past history of searches, anything that the search engine knows about you personally. If you're using Google and it's connected to your Gmail account, for example, might be pulling in additional information. When these little spiders go around and try and identify websites that have the search terms that you're searching for, all of that is underlying guided by statistics. So statistics can work in really powerful ways. The point here is also that it dictates what information we have access to. If there's a flaw in that algorithm of using your previous search histories or not, if there's a flaw in the algorithm of when the spiders are looking at when they're looking at all the possible websites that might have the search terms that you used, If there is some sort of flaw written into that software program, you might only get information from certain places and not information at all from other places. So there's a lot of underlying ways, even in terms of what access we have to information on the internet, there's a lot of ways that statistics can either make or break our experience. Living in a state like Nebraska, statistics is super relevant for our farm crops as well. So looking at forecasts, looking at weather, what's happening, all based in statistics. I think for the last several days, the weather forecast has said it's going to rain, it's going to rain, it's going to rain. Has not rained. So all of this is based on statistics, right? We're pulling back the veil, realizing there is no guarantee. When someone says it's going to rain, they're using probability. We're going to learn about probability. All that is based in chance. We could be totally wrong when it comes to statistics. Statistics is really about making the best educated decision, the best educated judgment that we can, getting access to the information we need to make better decisions. All right. Final example I want to talk about that is relevant in a class that is a social work class is another way that statistics are used. So there has been recent conversation about opening a new prison in Nebraska because of overcrowding issues. So here's some articles that date back to 2019, prison population hitting a new high, prison crowding going to get worse. And we've seen this being used as a way to propose a new prison being opened. So another way that statistics are used, they're forecasting, they're predicting, here's how many people we think are going to be incarcerated in the future. We're not going to fit those folks in the prison facilities we have currently. Therefore, we need new prison facilities. So when we incorporate our social work, social justice perspective into statistics, we have to think beyond just those types of statistics into bigger picture questions, bigger picture statistical questions, I would say, such as, why do we need the prison in the first place? Is it because we're trying to keep a community safe? If that's what our purpose is in expanding our prison systems, we need to think about content that's presented in sources such as the New Jim Crow. So the New Jim Crow, if you're not familiar, I would really encourage you to get familiar. The documentary 13th talks about this as well. It's available on Netflix. So the New Jim Crow talks about mass incarceration as essentially the New Jim Crow, but more so they focus on a whole lot of research and statistics that make the point that incarceration is not an effective way of keeping a society safe. In fact, incarceration breeds additional challenges for societies, resulting in them actually being even more unsafe than they were before. So when we talk about systems of mass incarceration, we can see statistics being used in arguing in their favor. We can also see statistics being used in arguing against this process, against this step. And if we want to ask critical questions such as, what actually is effective in reducing the need for prisons? If we don't want to have to expand our prison population into a whole nother prison, what are some other systems we could put in place to reduce the need for higher and higher levels of mass incarceration? Well, we can turn to statistics for some of those answers. If we're trying to address how mental health, mental illness plays into criminal behavior, we can look at journal articles that talk about how to prevent criminal recidivism, so criminal behaviors with people who have psychotic disorders or mental health challenges. Here's one on research misconduct and crime lessons from criminal science on preventing misconduct and promoting integrity in general. We could look at collaborations between our mental health and criminal justice systems instead. Turn to the research. What does statistics have to say about that? What does science have to say about that? Here's an international comparative overview of the rehabilitation of offenders and effective measures for the prevention of recidivism. So we have a lot of different types of evidence we could use looking at addiction. Is addiction playing into why people are incarcerated? Here's how, again, we can use statistics to ask some of these critical questions. If we look at the reasons people in Nebraska are incarcerated, is it criminal behavior? Is it drug use? Is it violence? What are the sorts of reasons that are bringing people into systems of incarceration? How could we use other programming to try and prevent that from happening in the first place? Developmental crime prevention. If we find maybe child abuse and neglect is playing a major role, investigate some of that as well. Look at the role of law schools. There's all kinds of reasons. There's all kinds of ways that we can use statistics as a tool, not just for understanding the world around us, but for helping us improve the world around us, for taking us beyond a superficial level of, whoops, we have too many people, we need to just automatically invest in this next thing. We can instead have more complicated conversations about how does statistics help us better understand the social problem so we can actually sustainably address this social problem, as opposed to, as the point is made in the new Jim Crow, continuing to feed into some of these broken systems, essentially strengthening the broken system at great human cost to really all of us. All right, if all this isn't compelling enough, I want to overview 5 quick reasons why you're here and why taking a statistics class is a relevant thing for folks who are interested in observing people, helping people, etc. So first of all, we read journal articles like a lot. So I've just shown you several. This is an article that I want to focus on a couple points from that talks about people, employees who have mental health coverage. How did they receive assistance and support in addressing their substance use issue? So if I'm somebody who's working with the population, who is a recovering substance use population, and I want to know how are they being served by our program, what could be helpful to them, this is an article that could actually be really beneficial. So it found that in this particular treatment process, people felt that treatment helped a lot. However, 1/4 reported getting less treatment than they felt that they needed. So when we're reading this article, we'll get to a point where we're going to be looking at statistics like this. So this is just kind of a regular article, and any research article where they're collecting evidence and research themselves, we're going to end up with a lot of terms that we don't really understand. So part of this class's intention is when we come across these chi-square equals 6.1, df equals 1, p is less than 0.01, understanding what that means. Helpful to be able to actually understand the journal articles that we as social science majors like to read a lot of. So first reason is to help you navigate these very complex journal articles, so that way you can write papers that are more well-rounded in what the research is reflective of, and more importantly, when you get out and actually practice whatever it is that you're hoping to practice, you'll be able to continue to turn back to journal articles and use your statistical knowledge as a way of continuing to improve the services that you're offering. Similarly, we want to know what works, and perhaps more importantly, we want to know what doesn't work. If flossing actually is ineffective, like first of all, we need a bit more research to come to that conclusion, but if flossing actually is ineffective, that's something that we want to know. I don't want to keep buying floss and, forcing that upon my teeth. That's not actually helpful. A better example is DARE. So this is always interesting to talk about in an in-class setting, because I imagine many of you went through this programming. I did in elementary school. What you may or may not know is that on a grand scale, DARE is not effective. So it has actually not at all, there's a lot of research evaluating DARE, and it has actually been found to really not at all influence somebody's future likeliness of using drugs. So programs like DARE, this was a generation after generation program, stuck around for decades, millions of dollars invested in this nationwide massive drug prevention program, only to find decades later that the research really didn't support the amount of energy, the amount of time, the amount of money that was being channeled into this program. So statistics are what we can use to prevent continued investment in something that is just really not working or really needs drastic changes made to it. Not all drug prevention programs are ineffective, just DARE needed some restructuring, and unfortunately there was a lot of resistance to early information that indicated the program was not effective. So they continued rolling it out as operated, sending lots of us through programming that in the end really didn't influence our ability to just say no to drugs. We need to understand our populations of interest, our clients, other people, the challenges they may be facing. So if we come back to this journal article I talked about just a minute ago in terms of what helps people who are in substance abuse recovery get help. So it was from an organization that employed folks who had previous substance abuse issues, and then they were looking at what led to those folks getting treatment, what led to those folks receiving effective treatment, etc. So this chart is looking at where do people get encouragement to enter treatment from. So we can see if we just look at these percentages, a lot of folks are getting encouragement from their friends and families. So over half of people indicated, so 51.6% of folks who were in this survey indicated that family or friends are the reason why they ultimately enter treatment. Their physician or health provider, none of the above were pretty close seconds there. But that could be encouraging for us to know. If we know most folks are getting referred from their family or friends, maybe we start including family and friends when we send out information about treatment service options. Maybe we somehow build a treatment program that encourages involvement of friends and family, because this kind of tells us that those folks play a major role in the success of whether someone even enters treatment to begin with. So potentially these folks could be really helpful to use as ongoing supports to make sure that the treatment is being effectively administered. So here, this highlighted chart, this is looking at any times in the past year where the client stopped treatment sooner or received less treatment than they wanted. So this is now looking at the folks who needed more treatment than they got. Whatever they got was not quite enough or not quite fully what they needed. And this is looking at the reasons, if they did have to stop treatment sooner or receive less treatment than they wanted, why? And we can see here, over half of the reasons were problems with coverage or cost. So again, this gives us information. Maybe we can't do a lot with insurance. That's, a big thing to take on, but we might be able to offer some sort of sliding scale fee. We could look at ways of restructuring our program to ensure that we're offering access to the people who need it. If we look up one, we can see that 23% of those folks said that time or location was inconvenient. Is there something else we could do? Could we offer a different type of treatment option after hours in the evenings? Could we provide childcare? Could we provide transportation or some other way of making sure that the folks that we're trying to serve are getting access to what they need? So statistics can help us understand all those things. On a general scale, they can dictate how, where, and when services are going to be offered. So let me pull up this little interactive map. If I can get it to fit, whoops. If I can get it to fit in our screen, hold on just a second. All right, that's better. So here's an interactive map that Kids Count Nebraska, so that's put on by Voices for Children. So Voices for Children is a nonprofit organization in Nebraska, and they pulled together this information about child poverty. We can look at what each county has in terms of rates of child poverty. So we can see the darker colors are areas where they have a bit more poverty. So over here in Box Butte County, 42.7% of children under 18 were deemed to be in poverty, which if we want to know what they're defining as poverty, we can look over here on the side and see how they're talking about that. We can also look over here. Let's see if we can find where Omaha is. I should know this. Here we go, Douglas County. We can see Douglas County comparisons, 19.7% in poverty. So wow, that tells us that there's a lot of county by county difference in how poverty is appearing across the state. If a place like Omaha has roughly 20% of poverty, and then over here in Box Butte, it's roughly 43% of kids are in poverty, maybe we need to be investing some more services in Box Butte. Same if we look at child food insecurity. We can look around here on this map, determine what are some areas of the county where people are really struggling with access to food, where they're not having access to food. Again, we see Box Butte County is pretty high. So if we're making policy decisions on a statewide level, we're going to want to know some of these indicators as well to see where do we need to be investing services? Where are people most needing help? The same if we look at this health indicator, which would bring up this one. We can look at things like pre-K enrollment. We can look at school meals. We can look at where are uninsured children living in Nebraska. So Box Butte actually looks okay on this one. But Blaine County, Thomas County, a little bit not as quite as good as we might want to see. We can look at average birth weight. So there's a lot of ways that we can use statistics in how to make decisions about where are we going to offer services, what services are we going to offer, what needs to happen. Ideally, statistics are what are being used to guide the interventions that we're designing. Of course, in the real world, that doesn't always happen as intended, but that's why we're in a class like this. Of course, overall, they help us understand inequality. They help us advocate for change. We're going to spend more time on this example in a couple weeks, but one of the ways that I've used statistics personally in my experience was when I worked for Nebraska Appleseed. We used a ton of statistics to take a look at what was happening for young people who were aging out of the foster care system and suddenly entering adulthood without really much of a safety net or any kind of assistance at all. Young people would wake up on their 18th or 19th birthday, suddenly be cut off from the state, be sent out on their own. So this was a report that I helped put together, looking at all kinds of statistics, all kinds of data, the number of children who are aging out of foster care each year. Ultimately, we use this to help advocate for the Bridge to Independence program. If you're familiar with that, the Bridge to Independence program, it's not going to come up now. Hold on a second. So the Bridge to Independence program is now actually a statewide program in Nebraska that offers support for young people who are aging out of the foster care system. So data was absolutely essential in our advocacy efforts on this one. Had we not used data, I really don't think we would have been able to get that bill passed, which ultimately created a law, which the law said, hey, DHHS, you have to implement this program. So ultimately, statistics in this situation were used to create an entirely new statewide way that young people are moving through and out of the foster care system in Nebraska. Again, hopefully much more leading towards prevention of these kinds of social issues rather than continuing to have to invest our efforts on the back end after the problems have already happened. All right, so I want to end with some super quick tips for success in this class and moving forward. First and foremost, learning statistics is very much like learning a foreign language. I would really encourage a lot of patience with yourself in this class. Give yourself time to integrate this content as much as you can. Recognize that we'll be building on these foundations as we move through the semester. So something that doesn't make sense in week 1 might make more sense to you in week 2, in week 3, in week 4, and moving forward. So give yourself time to learn. Recognize that it's going to be a bit of a process, and that's okay. That's part of it. That's how this class has been built up. I would also really recommend taking good notes. So I would really recommend not relying on the textbook. We'll be using the textbook to supplement our information, but by and large, we're going to be thinking much more critically than even our book sometimes does. So I would really encourage you, take notes on the lectures, take notes on your textbook, keep your notes in some sort of way that's organized, so that way you can rely on your notes for the assessment more so than trying to flip through your textbook to find any of the answers. So being organized is a great skill to try out in a class like this. I would also encourage you to think about what works best for you. In terms of accountability, the accountability that you demonstrate in this class is going to make or break your success. The way this class is built, as long as you're continuing to engage, if you're trying your hardest, it is very likely that you will be successful and that you will get through this class successfully. If you're not quite keeping up with the homework or missing some of those participation scores, that's when things can get tricky because you're falling behind in the content. And again, the content is going to build on itself. So it's really important in this class to make sure that you are covering each week's content. There's not going to be a week that you can really just totally skip and not have to know that content. So I'd really encourage you to think about how can you create a situation that's going to work for you this semester. Does that look like spending the same time each week? Does that look like every Sunday afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. I'm going to watch videos and do my readings and get ready for my statistics homework? What works best for you? Does it work best to spread it out where you're doing your participation points on Mondays and your application on Wednesdays? Does it work better to do it all together? Those are some of the questions that you'll have to ask yourself as you think about how to be successful in this class. So I would encourage you to just do some of that thinking up front, so that way you can set some sort of plan and you can follow that plan for yourself throughout the semester. And finally, don't struggle alone. So this is the help button. When you hit that get help button on our Canvas homepage, it will take you to some of these items. There's a YouTube channel that can be very helpful for Googling different statistical processes if there's something you're feeling unsure about. Our book can be very helpful. There's online resources, flashcards, quizzes, etc. that you can use, additional videos, additional multimedia content. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to me as well. I'll be adding additional tips in here too, but this is one thing that I would really encourage you. Don't wait until you're feeling overwhelmed to reach out. Reach out beforehand, and let's re-engage you back in the class to make sure that all of us can move through this semester successfully together.